Right. Well, welcome everybody to the BrandQ webinar series of Why It Doesn't Match, When and Why Good Color Goes Bad. My name is Tim Beckley. I'm the Vice President of Idealliance. Appreciate everyone joining us from around the world. We always get an incredible crowd of registrants. I think we're up to 300 or so today. So phenomenal response from around the world. I'd like to first start off by thanking everybody for joining this webinar, and also especially thank all the panelists for joining the call today. We've got Ron Ellis who's the CEO of Ron Ellis Consulting, Francois Palakin from WestRock, Guy Page from WestRock, and obviously Jeff Collins, many people probably know, who's the National Implementation for Color Management at Konica Minolta. All of these individuals have tremendous experience in the brand space, color management space, process control, and extraordinary amount of mind share. So we're very excited to present to you this subject matter. And with that, I'll pass it off to Ron. At the very end, we'll take questions for 15 minutes, and you can type in your questions, and we'll flow through those.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Tim. And my name is Ron Ellis, and glad to see you guys here, and thanks for coming. I'm a consultant based out of the Northeast, and I spend a lot of time working with brands and with printers and dealing with the topic that we're hitting today. I probably spent 3 days this week dealing with this exact topic. I'm also chair of Print Properties, and we had a meeting right before here, a little Print Properties meeting. If that's something you're interested in, you can email one of us and get some more information on it. And also do a bunch of G7 training as well. So today, our panelists and some of the guests that we have Guy Page and Francois Pelican. And Guy is Director and General Manager of WestRock Montreal, and he has a lot of experience. So he's got quite a bit of experience in flexo, in gravure, in many different types of print. And this same topic we're covering today, I know that he's spent quite a bit of his life in print working on this type of issue. And also Francois is supervisor of prepress. I could not locate a picture of you, Francois, so that's your LinkedIn picture right there.
Sorry.
But anyway, he's at WestRock Montreal, and he spends same thing, quite a bit of time on color matching. He's very good at it. Has a lot of experience with it, and working with very discriminating brands and customers on that too. So these guys have a lot of great experience that they're going to share in talking about it. And when the rubber hits the road is when you're in the printing plant trying to do the color match. That's when all this really happens, and the printers are the ones who really get stuck and have the good experience and the good knowledge of how to get around it. After that, we have Jeff Collins, and Jeff Collins is National Integration Manager at Konica Minolta. And also, prior to Konica Minolta, Jeff worked for many years at KBA on both pre-press and dealing with press issues and color matching. So he has quite a bit of experience with these same exact issues as well. So what we're going to cover today, and typically what we do with these is we have three of us who spend about 10, maybe 15 minutes, something like that, talking about the topic. And then after we've covered that, we have 15 minutes of open questions at the end, and you can ask any question you have, and we're glad to answer them. So if we move on, our agenda is, I'll start off with a little bit of an introduction about the challenge of color matching. Guy and Francois and some of their colleagues from there are going to give the printer's perspective and have some good examples to show. And then Jeff Collins will be able to discuss with us kind of what we bring up and kind of bounce back at us some of what we talked about. And then from that point on, we'll have a Q&A session. So before we do that, this is a BrandQ webinar, and I'll spend just a couple minutes talking about BrandQ. And the reason we do these webinars is to educate brands and help bring printers and brands together. So it's a beautiful Friday afternoon, at least where I am up in the Northeast. And but important to me is this concept of brands and printers being able to get together. So the BrandQ program, and the Q stands for quality, is all about communicating and educating and teaching brands to validate and print supply chains to validate. That's our main idea. We have an education component. You can see in here, this is one of our classes where we have a bunch of print buyers who are in here learning how to measure and learning how to kind of relate the design element of print to the actual output of it. You can see in here communicating, they're looking at and discussing and talking about color. And validation is measurement. And we also have a certified supply chain program where for brands we will use the same facilities we use for G7 Master, but we can actually take in and check and audit sheets and help them assess printers and figure out if things are good, and if not, what needs to be done. So that's BrandQ. Keep that in mind. The next BrandQ training that we have is in Microsoft, and it's in mid-September. I'll give dates a little bit later on, but we actually have a training at Microsoft at their facility in Seattle in September. So back to our topic today, why doesn't it match? You know, very often I get this question. As I mentioned, 3 days this week I was in printing plants and dealing with this exact question of why can't we get a match? What's going on and why don't we get a match? So it's really important. And typically what I get for a question about this match relates to a couple different things. And the first one is proof to press, meaning here's my proof. Why can't these guys match it? So this would be the print buyer talking to me saying, you know, I've got my proof. We designed our proof. It looks good. We love our proof. How come these printers can't match it? What's wrong with these guys? That's the first question. The second one is often a reprint. And the reprint question is, hey, these guys printed this 5 times before, or maybe not 5 times, but these guys printed this before, and now they're trying to print it again, and it's like a disaster. So here I am, I'm at this printer. They're trying to print it. I know they've done it before, but they can't even match what they've done before. And that's quite common as well. And the other one would be a new supplier, meaning you were at a new printer. They said they're good. They said they're G7 Master printers. They said they know what they're doing, but these guys can't seem to match my proof. So those are the way that I hear this question. I hear this question a lot. And for a printer in a printing plant, very often when they call me, that's when they are at the point where the customer is raising questions and potentially talking about moving work away. That's usually when I get a phone call that's quite urgent about what's going on with the printing. And really good printers like Guy and Francois are, you know, all over this. They actually have a whole procedure they go through to figure out what's changed and what's gone on. But this question is kind of the central question of, it's printing, it should be easy. Why doesn't it match? What's going on here? You know, what's wrong with these guys is usually the way I hear it, something like that. Now, if we look at why it doesn't match, when I look at printing, one of the ways that I tend to think about printing is that it's quite complex. So, you know, while it may not be rocket science, if we look at printing, there's a lot of things going on. And when I say it's not rocket science, we take a look at it. This is a press, and if you take a look at a press, the press has chemistry, the press has ink. If you look in the middle, you can see all these mechanical things. There's rollers, there's gears, there's gear trains, there's environment, there's temperature, there's ink, there's, you know, the rubber on the rollers, there's all these different things, there's pressure, there's tension. So even though it's not rocket science, sometimes I'm amazed that printers can print as well as they can, because the number of factors and the number of things that go into printing are really complicated. There's so much in these presses, that so many pieces and parts, and then you have operators and people and all these different factors, and it has a lot to do with it. So while it's not rocket science, it's not that far behind it. And some of the people who are on our standards committees and print properties, you know, they're actually physicists. This stuff is not that easy to control and not that easy to get it all right. So when you look at it, while it's not rocket science, there's a lot of things going on here. And when I look at that some days, that's where I'm amazed that printing is as good as it is. And the other part is, you know, you think you could take your Epson printer that you make your proofs on, that pretty much matches day after day after day, you get the same thing. But when you're looking at the printing that we're talking about, if you had to make 20,000 of something, the Epson wouldn't do it. Or the inkjet printer, the small roll-fed one like we make our proofs on. We're talking, 19,000 sheets per hour, high speed, both sides, all this type of stuff. Super mechanical, super complicated. So that's a large part of why it's so complicated. If we take a look at some of these pieces and some of the reasons that we have issues here, many of the pieces that are in here, the first thing is aims. And this is where we talk in BrandQ quite a bit about this, but we have to actually know what we're trying to print to. And a lot of times designers don't quite even have that part. So we have to know, what are we aiming at, what are we printing to? We have to be able to communicate it and tell people, here's what we expect. We're printing on a cruddy board, we don't expect it to be as good, or we're printing on a really nice board, we're paying a lot of money, we expect this to be very good. But communicating what we want. Digital file prep. That means we actually have to give files to people that can be printed correctly. And I'll talk about that in just a minute. But getting the file ready, getting the right file to the printer, making sure it's the correct file with the correct color conversion done to it, that part sounds simple. But if you're somebody who has a couple thousand products or SKUs or versions of a product, then you may end up having several thousand versions of a file and then multiply that by all the print methods you go to. And getting that same simple file to the right printer with the right conversion may not be easy. We also have the machine language where we take something that's a digital file and we're rendering that physically, which means we're making inkjet droplets, we're making halftone screens on a metal plate, we're transferring that onto a rubber blanket and then onto a piece of paper. So this machine language to physical translation is not trivial, not simple. We have plating or imaging. If we're digital, it's imaging. If we're printing traditionally, we have some type of plate. Then we have our ink, and ink has a lot to do with color, which people do not always think about that. But we also have chemistry, and with our chemistry, we have same type of complications, and then the process of putting all that together and controlling it and temperature and everything. And, of course, mechanical considerations, which are things like gears and rubber and rollers and paper transports and feeds. And then we have operator issues. And the big part of the operator issue is human, which is not to be underestimated because that can have a lot to do with one job matching one day and maybe not matching the other day. And keep in mind as you go through all this that printing came from craft. So printing used to be a craft. Still is a craft, but 10 years ago, the instruments weren't as good. The process of doing it wasn't as nailed down and as scientific. But 10 years ago, it really was quite visual and quite a bit of craft. So a couple of examples, I'm going to run through a handful of examples here of why it doesn't match. And these are things that I run into in my daily job. And this one actually was this week was one. So why doesn't it match? And taking a look at something that somebody printed and they had printed it before, file didn't look the same. Customer starts talking to the printer and complaining to the printer and giving them all sorts of grief about it. Printer runs a proof of the file, and then they compare it to the proof they did last time, and the file is different. Turns out the designer put the wrong element in. Why didn't it match? Because the file from the designer was actually the wrong file. That's quite common, making sure the actual input file is correct. Simple, but not that simple, like I said, when you have thousands of files and they're all aimed at different things. Another one, very common one, why doesn't it match? Press conditions change. So if we take a look here, if you look at this is a little screen from press sign showing the actual change that happened in a job. And if we look at it, the cyan is 4% higher, black is higher. So this job basically pushed to the blue side in the midtones and didn't look correct. So press conditions changed. And that could be as simple as pressure, could be a blanket, could be a roller, could be something going on with the ink, but they have to actually be able to detect this. So the print operator has to be able to catch this, know that it changed, figure out what it is, and then make that correction. So a lot of times why things don't match when they did match before can be this mechanical issue. So something mechanically is going on with that cyan unit. or it could be a different paper, but something's causing that to be a mechanical difference. So another big example, if we look at them, we had the bad file. The second big example would be the press condition. You know, the press is not the same. And a lot of, if you look at G7, a lot of things like calibrating it, that's the easy part. The hard part is maintaining it over time so that day after day you get a similar print result, which sounds easy but very complex. Another why doesn't it match is lighting. You can see this great picture of the horrible, horrible lighting up there. But this example is where the lighting is incorrect. And basically, if lighting is not correct, then what we look at is not valid. And if I go into a printing plant and I'm working with them on color matching, if I notice or if I measure the lighting and figure out that the lighting is invalid, then I won't look at color there. I won't do a color match under that lighting. So very often lighting can be part of the issue. And a couple more examples, substrate. So substrate changing. Here's a bunch of packaging boards you can take a look at and you can see the difference. And these are all Carolinas, but notice that fifth one down, that's Carolina, but look at the color of it compared to the other Carolinas. So substrate actually changing color. And as we know, substrate changing color changes the color of the entire print. So print moves with the color of the substrate. And very often in these type of issues, if they can put the correct substrate back in, then color will move back to where it should be. Another example, the rogue or bad employee. So if we take a look at that, you know, I see this very often when I'm doing press calibration on shift 1. I've got usually a premium operator. And if I don't get my press calibration done at the moment that it changes to shift 2, at shift 2, the guy comes in, begins to change settings potentially, and that operator can basically slow everything down or change everything. So remember that all these variables I've talked about, and I showed the rocket ship and said it's not rocket science, but it sort of is. The operator has a lot to do with it because they control it. And if they are not controlling all that color and machinery or aren't as good as the previous operator, then the result is not the same. Another example of why things don't match has to do with machine capability. And this could be an example where first time you ran, they put you on the nice new, brand new machine, and it was perfect and everything comes out great, it's super sharp and great looking. And then the second time you run, they're really, really busy and they throw you on that machine that you see right there. Okay, maybe not that machine, but they throw you on the 15-year-old machine that still can print okay, but it's not as sharp and not as perfect and doesn't run as high quality work. So if the machine can't physically do it, then you're going to have matching issues as well. Another issue that is very, very common and why doesn't it match is coding. So putting on a coating shifts color, and some coatings shift color a lot, and some coatings have OBAs in them, which also cause color issues. So when we're looking at a proof, does that proof represent a coated sheet? And when they did their calibration, did they do it with coating? So another reason is coating, and coating also can push the color or make the color look different. So those are just some examples. Those are kind of common ones that happen quite often. So when it gets into why doesn't it match, for myself as a consultant, I begin to measure color, I begin to measure mechanical attributes depending on the machine I'm on, and look at all these. And the things that I look through, I check the source file. Typically, I make a proof of the source file to see what that looks like, and we'll go in and look at it. Check the plate curves that the job was run with. If they put the wrong curves in, it can cause an issue. I check the paper. Very often, I'll have them tail in different paper. I check the ink and measure the ink and check how it's laying down and check the surface of the ink on the paper and make sure it's actually adhering correctly. Rollers, making sure rollers are good and maintained, and blankets that they're not kind of fried and not too old. Pressure, so they strike rollers, they check pressure. If it's digital, fuser belts and this, when they start to get streaks. The operator, watching the operator and making sure they are a good operator and know what they do. If you're a brand and you have really, discriminating color needs, they're probably putting a good operator on, hopefully, but if there isn't, that could be an issue. The RIP, because some RIPs do color better than others. Measurement mode, so all the parameters as they measure being correct. Inkjets, they have clogged nozzles. Shift change, meaning job starts on one shift and then they shift change to new operators. Then communication of what did we actually want. So I've actually been in cases where, and one pretty recently where, you know, we're printing and it's not matching, it's not matching, it's not matching. And then finally, we read the document of what it's supposed to match after about 6 hours of this, and the document was not, you know, asking for the same thing as all the other jobs that they had sent. So we were matching, but we didn't think we were. Machine capability, can the machine physically print it? Old machine, new machine, they have different capabilities. And then the gamut of the machine. So these are some of the factors, and there's actually quite a few more, but these are, you know, ones I look at usually right off the bat when we don't have color matching occurring. If we look at the most common, these are my ones I run into day after day after day. First one is process control, and that's where they don't have their printing under control or their proofing. That means that the press is not printing the same day after day, and nobody knows why it isn't. And if you're on one of these calls that the WestRock guys here were on a few months ago, they went through and showed how they check their press up and down, left and right, and assure that it's where it should be. But many plants don't do that, so that's a big part of it. Paper I mentioned, lighting, ink, RIP, the operator not being up to it. Specialty printing, that means glossy UV coatings, printing on plastic, things like that, which really shift color. And then, of course, the machine not being able to do it or not having the right gamut. So those are kind of the most common things I run into when I'm doing this. So if you have questions about any of those, text those in, and as we get to the Q&A session, we can kind of run through those. So Steve, at this point, can you flip it over to Francois and Guy?
Yes, thanks, Ron. So Francois, I'm handing you the controls here. And while we get that set up, reminder that Ron mentioned, you can input questions in through the chat box. You may find the controls at the bottom now to turn your chat box on, and you can just type in a question and hit enter. And also recording of the presentation will be coming after we're done too. But with that, Francois is up and running. So Francois, you've got it.
Yeah. So you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Looks great.
Yes.
Okay. So we're on. So welcome everybody.
Yes.
My name is Papilakin, pre-press supervisor. I'm assisted with Guy Page, regional director of operation that Ron introduced earlier. Also with us in the room, we have Alain Dupuis, which is one of our senior press operator, and Daniel Leroy, another press operator that is with us today. So first of all, we're going to see pretty much, we're going to go a bit deeper into what Ron just expressed. As we'll see, the color match variant that can be noticed in two main categories. First of all, we're going to see printed picture reproduction issue. These issue relates to image made of 4-color process. And we're also going to see ink color reproduction issue that relates to specific ink used to print each color. Here we can see something that relates to a printed picture. We can see on the right-hand side the expected result, which was a nice neutral picture. Unfortunately, on the printed result, we ended up with a much more red than required image. So let's see what could cause that in a few seconds. We have another example of a typical situation. We have a nice approved light blue swatches, which is very brilliant. Unfortunately, when it gets to the printed result, we're getting on the dirty side and we lose that kind of brilliance. Again, we're going to see what can cause this situation. We're kind of recapping a little bit what Ron just expressed as some of the variables that can influence the final print. The file, the plate curves, the ink type, the coatings, the lighting, substrate, printing form, and also the press setup. These are all as much variables that can influence. First of all, file control. Ron talked about having the good file to be on the production. First thing to do, if you have a doubt, compare the files you have with the expected file. Was the file supplied for producing the plates is the good one that was used for producing the proof? One of the first steps, pretty obvious, to make sure you're starting right. Second thing, we know that the plate curve, the G7 calibration is all about curve. So it's really important to ensure that the accurate plate curve is applied. Make sure that you can identify that plate curve. Take note that due to that very specific result, each press ink, substrate, and rotation combination may require a specific curve. So that's something you want to take in consideration when we're talking about producing from one machine to another. Also very important, plate treatment. The control and the verification of the overall process is a key to make sure that we're starting right. Ink properties. We know that we're printing with inks, so these are one of the raw materials that have a lot of influences. Depending on the process. Let's talk about lithoprinting. The ink hue and its opacity will have a direct impact on how they lay down on the paper. Conventional or UV inks, each kind of ink has its kind of pros and cons with limitations. Ink trapping, especially when we're overprinting one ink over the other. The ink rotation will have a direct effect, and that's really related to the opacity of the ink and how they will overprint one to the other. Let's talk about flexo and gravure printing. We're still going to face some hue and opacity situation, but in these processes, we're adding the viscosity and the volume transfer via an analox. How does that is being transferred? It's having a direct effect.
So at that point, if we have any problem on the press, we have to go back to the pre-press or the ink room for any correction.
Let's talk about control tools for four-color process and spot colors. It's important to understand that a spectrophotometer and a densitometer has to be installed to read the color and the density values. An inline system is a must if you want to ensure accurate reading. Having a standardized throughout all the playthrough, the press room, integrated software that is connecting pre-press, ink room, press, and operator is important to monitor throughout the production. Gray balance to verify curve accuracy based on G7 target values, the density to control ink amount, color measurement, and lab values for the spot colors.
With the old software we had to measure all the patches, we used to do it by hand, one at a time. And now with the new software we have, it's a lot faster to read, all the patches and make corrections.
Again, this system will allow us to verify the ink's hue. Ink's hue is being calculated in delta E. Typical tolerance is about 2 delta E for spot color. Again, it is pretty process specific, so it may vary from one process to another. Just for a little explanation, delta E is a difference between two colors. So that's the measurement unit that is being used to say, are we within the tolerance, or how to compare two colors. How do we achieve it? You can see this color bar sample or control strip. Having it on inline system is giving us the mid-tone, lower tone, and high tones for the gray balance that is made out of CMYK. We can see the two green patches, the light green and the dark green patch. This is going to be used for measuring the hue of the spot color. Then again, we have the black, cyan, magenta, and yellow strips to control the mix of these colors to achieve and having a direct impact on the gray balance and also the picture reproduction. So having such a control strip or control tool on the press sheet is mandatory to achieve it.
So notice that the numbers in blue under the color bar are related to each ink key used to control the ink amount on the sheet.
Another important topic that Ron expressed, coating. You can see that the gloss varnish has a tendency to enhance color. Matte varnish will have a tendency to tone down the color. Some coatings may even tint the highlight color or when you see the board. So some may have a yellowish, some other a bluish factor. It's also important when you want to get the good reading and the good reporting from your system that the color being read through it, that the control strip to be coded. This is giving an accurate result of what your eye is seeing. Another key important thing, prepare your ink swatch and proof according to the final coding. As an example, the printed carton that you see on that picture is all printed on the same blue. The only difference of color is made with a very matte and a very gloss coating. So you can see how deep the effects can be based on it. Substrate, property affects render. For sure, the substrate hue is directly influencing the render color. Also, substrate surface affects the ink's absorption and the drying of it. Here we can see substrate has a major influence on color, especially the lighter the color, the higher the impact. We can see on the left-hand side a brilliant color swatch that has been printed on very light paper. If you print these same swatches over a dirtier or yellower substrate, then you can see the combination that the little bright, lively colors are being directly affected by it. At the same time, you can also notice, example for the dark green and dark red, that they're barely being affected of it due to their hue. It's going to have another impact on the blue, which the yellow is directly affecting the color result, making it a bit greener. So now you can see in fact, we can see why originally we're having a hue difference between the two patches. Lighting. Ron also talked about having a good or bad lighting. Light source has a direct effect on the render. If you look on the right-hand side with the apple, you can see that an apple being light with a standard bulb will look much warmer than if it's being lighted by a camera's flash or something like that. To make sure that we all talk the same language and we all see the same thing. And also one important thing, align with the reading, with the lightning of the reading features on the press. It's important that the D50, which corresponds to 5,000 Kelvin, is being used. 5,000 Kelvin corresponds pretty much to the sun lighting around noon. So this is a standard for the printing industry, and this is important so that we all speak the same language and all see the same thing. Ink distribution on the printing form. Hey, here we can see some problems on the ones we have in here. You can see on the left-hand side where the X's are, there can be some build-up of ink that is going to directly affect the readings from the control tools we have on the press sheet, and also by the same time affect the printed result of it. On the far left-hand side, you can see that there can be a build-up of ink right below the printing of that image that is going to be used, so that's when it's going to hit the image. It's going to have a different effect than the one that is being, first of all, being printed, and then a build-up of ink right after. It's going to have a direct impact on the gray balance that is being on the control itself, and give some false alarm or false control element. On the right-hand side, you can see what a single plate looks like. So you can see what the cyan, how much cyan is being carried on the sheet. To balance this, we go with a even and efficient ink distributed layout. That really helps to have a good printing result, to have accurate printing, and also to make sure that the control tools are really giving the feedback necessary for each job. Press setup. Large machine, many variables. Again, the huge beast, as you saw on the first slide from round 2. So again, blanket type, ink rotation, ink water balance, fountain solution, conductivity, run speed. These are some of the only some of the factors that the press operator will be facing throughout the run. Again, these are special guys that are playing with the mechanic and adjustment, so they will make sure that to minimize all the variables to it.
Key points to ensure the best color match. This is so critical. We forgot how important it is to monitor and control all the variables, equipment, process, raw material. Without this, it won't match, and you're going to be asking yourself, why doesn't it match? These equipment that are installed to monitor also give us a lot of information on the capability of our equipment to stay consistent, and at the same time, we have realized over time that we're capable to detect mechanical problem with those equipment. As the operator is performing a job, they will see with the equipment that we have right now in place if they have a problem with a deck or something like that. The reporting tool, implement reporting tools so it can be performed as often as possible is also crucial. Software that are hooked up the press, as every sheets are read, data are downloaded, and operator can know from as they progress in the job how much they are in control and where and when they are losing control. Always calibrate to the weakest link. This is so important. We have a tendency to forget that not each and every part of our process are at the same level, and it is very important to understand which one it is, so you do not show something that down the road you're not going to be able to reproduce with consistency. Compare various printing processes. This is like litho, flexo, gravure to understand which is the best fit for your campaign. We all know that sometimes we're trying to match an offset, a metallic that was produced with flexo or gravure, where we should have started printing and the other one should have calibrated to us. So these are the kind of things that are very important to understand before you start. Implement color management control system to ensure consistent printing run after run, as we talked before. Overall consistency and quality will benefit of it independently of the equipment. And that's something that Ron was talking about earlier. Sometimes you start a job the first time on one machine, brand new equipment with the best operator, and the next time you're going to run it on another machine. Well, your system has to be built that independently of which machine it's going to go on, you will be able to reproduce that job time after time. I'd like to add two things that are not said in there but are so important. Invest in training again, and again. You will never train your operator enough. Listen to them. They're the ones that understand the machine. They know the machine, and make sure that the feedback between what the customer is saying, what the operators are seeing, are in a closed loop with the people making the separation. And if you're capable of doing that, then you're probably going to be able to find out why it doesn't match.
Well, thank you all for your audience. Giving back the presentation to Ron. Thanks a lot for everybody.
Thank you. We probably pop on to Jeff. You know, in spring and in here, we asked Jeff to present today at the last minute last evening, and he doesn't have any slides to share, but he has a tremendous amount of experience in this space all over the world, working with OEMs and brands and printers, and really wanted his insight into the core and adding value in regards to kind of wrapping up conversation and speaking to the kinds of things that were talked about with that. So Jeff, we appreciate you coming in with short notice on that.
Yeah. And Steve, can you flip me back to control?
Sure. Yeah, guys, just doing a sound check real quick. Can you hear me?
Gotcha.
Okay, wonderful. Hey, Tim and Ron and Francois, thanks a lot. And with this topic is very, very big, and the states that I work in, I work for Konica Minolta, and we make a variety of printing equipment, software solutions, spectrophotometers, et cetera. And, you know, we typically work with a variety of printing companies as well as marketing and brand owners as well. So we kind of work in both spaces. And our biggest challenge is, one, to make our printers profitable, because the only way they can be profitable is if they meet the end user's requirements and needs. And typically that's wrapped around color consistency and their brand requirements. Brand requirements might be, I need to have my Home Depot orange or my Nike green or whatever the spec is for that particular job. It needs to be more, I would say, more educated and sophisticated brand owners where they understand how to communicate their brand requirements for color, so they know somewhat about process capability, so they would not hold a printer accountable to hitting, let's say, a delta E of 2 if they're running, you know, paperboard, as opposed to, let's say, a high-quality coated offset sheet or a high-quality inkjet, you know, solution for signage or POP, POS, or even packaging on, you know, the higher-quality substrates. So the point I'm trying to make here is that we have a lot of mistakes in the production process when that file leaves the brand owner. Even if it's communicated well, that's a huge plus, okay? So that education part with the customer, making sure they're not providing us unrealistic expectations for the color is key to begin with. And again, it's communication, but then once that file goes into production, we have usually a very tight deadline. If you're, especially now with digital technology, it used to, take 3 to 4 days to prep a file, depending on what type of application it is, but just looks like, look at on-demand or short run or signage, your inkjet wide format. And so I play typically in the digital spaces, and the majority of them also have, offset, typically not gravure or flexo, although, in my past life I did run across a few, but it's typically offset in digital. One, even when you do get that brand information correct, the Pantone is prepared properly, the four-color is correctly set up, and the RGB is still RGB. So if I have images that are RGB, they're correct. CMYK, they're correct. We pre-flight it, and most of a lot of people don't pre-flight. So part of our implementation and training services that we provide to help educate the print manufacturer is, start straight at file input. We're addressing the file input into workflow. We're looking at job ticketing information as well. And then the file itself. If we're supposed to print, let's say, again, a Nike green within a delta E of, below 2 on a coded sheet, all right, we'll get the file and recognize that it's been submitted to us in a CMYK breakdown by mistake. So we've got these little stopgaps or quality assurance points in each part of the process, and that's just the beginning, file input, okay? Then when the file is, put into production, sometimes we have a proof, sometimes we don't have a proof, okay? We're not doing a color check. The client's not coming in and viewing it before they run the job to prove that the approval is being done remotely. It could be approved by scanning a color bar or something to validate that we're in fact hitting, let's say if they're speccing their job to be Grackle 2006 or a Grackle 2013 or swap or something of that nature. We have to provide proof digitally with a spectrophotometer that my press is in fact hitting the conditions correctly, and then they'll okay the job. But what the point I'm getting to, once the job hits the press, in this case digital, they print it out one day and it's correct, and then I come back, let's say 3 days later, a month later, whatever, and I print it out, it's incorrect. So of course we've already validated that the input file is the same. We know the file is good. What is wrong with the press? So that seems to be the biggest training opportunity for our customers, our printers, okay, is to teach them how to keep that press within its capability, and the condition. We've heard a lot, and I'm getting a little redundant here, where we have, what Ron and Francois has already talked about. They pretty much covered everything. So when we're at press, we need to teach, whether it's offset or digital, how to make sure that they validate that press condition is, consistent, okay? And we do that with a variety of tools. On the digital, we're using a spectrophotometer. We're using a typical test form that has a chart that we'll read in that tells us whether or not we're in the bullseye or we're outside the bullseye. It's no different than taking, and this is a four-color process, no different than taking a measurement of a Pantone swatch from a swatch book and then measuring the printed sample and getting a delta E value, and in a simplistic way, okay? Francois and Ron both went into even additional variables in that case scenario I just mentioned, where you're measuring two different Pantones, the printed swatch or the printed color versus the Pantone swatch book, for instance, okay, to validate the color's correct. You know, you could have paper issues, there's a number of things. You could have, the instrument may be, the spectrophotometer may need to be recertified. In the instrument, there could be variation, just like you could have variation of color within the substrate, the plain, you know, white substrate. So we do a validation and we give them simply an SOP, standard operating procedure that says, you know, you need to check this, this, and this. And once that's under control, many of the color matching issues, unless you're very, very critical when you're starting to slice, you know, the hair where you're saying, you know, that's not acceptable if it's, you know, a half of a delta E outside of my specification. Visually, that may not be, you know, the case. It looks the same visually, but the numbers aren't lining up to what the spec says. But in any event, when we apply what I just mentioned, when we're taking and putting a holistic, you know, approach to file input, communicating with the customer, knowing what our process capability of the printing device is and telling the customer that as well, and checking on a routine basis with the right gear, the right instrumentation, the right lighting conditions. Volume for the printer goes up because they're not experiencing a ton of downtime. That means their jobs get out quicker. So we're able to ship the job to the customer and we're able to meet our SLA. And so if there's anything that, you know, I could convey to you as far as, one, what are the causes? You know, on this webinar, we've seen just about everything. I don't think I could do a better job in articulating why colors don't match. Again, the biggest thing that I could convey is that is communication, understanding the realities of the capability of the press, and then holding the printer accountable. When we say a buying requirement, and I'm putting myself in the shoes of a creative or an art director or someone that's buying print for one of these, you know, let's say a large Fortune 100, when I put myself in their shoes, I want to make sure, one, I know what my capability is, and is it reasonable, is it profitable, and can I get it done correctly, and what printing process and equipment can do the job effectively, and do they validate for me? Can they tell me and prove to me that their presses, for instance, when I say graphic 2006 to 2013, they give me tangible, objective proof that that's in fact the case, okay? Because right now with Idealliance and the G7 Master Program and now the BrandQ, this all kind of works together in an ecosystem to solve the problem that we're talking about today. So as a print buyer, I definitely want to know beyond a shadow of a doubt whether or not you have accuracy. And then we can start to talk about really cool things like expanded gamut printing, where I'm using inkjet or 6-color process that can save me a ton of money instead of running a job, let's say, with, you know, a 5th and 6th color on an offset press. I can possibly do it digitally or on the offset press, and I can capture all those Pantone colors, my brand colors that are outside your normal CMYK process. That's kind of another step, but it all comes back to that same point, is that we know what our target is for our brand, for our colors, and we follow the best practices when we prepare the file, and we communicate very well and clear with the printer. Most printers, believe it or not, won't want to go back to the customer to tell them to fix the file, and that fear, hopefully through education and some of the efforts we're doing with BrandQ will overcome that, and the creatives and the printers will communicate better and be a little bit more understanding when a printer says, hey, don't give it to me in CMYK. I know you gave it to the guy down the street and he did it fine for you, but we can get much more accurate and much more efficient if you took that Pantone color, your brand color, and left it as a 5th spot color, because we can do more things with that file prepared correctly than we can if we have to fool around with curves and make plate remakes because I have a shift in somewhere in the process, if that makes any sense. But hopefully I'm not going off on too much of a tangent, but I'll go ahead and leave it at that and go to Q&A there, Ray.
That's great.
Yeah, let's move into Q&A. Great.
We've got a number of questions that come in, so we'll jump right in here. So the first question is, do you employ goniometers and goni spectrometers to measure gloss?
Yeah, let's have Guy and Francois, they can answer that.
Yeah, to measure the gloss, yes, there are some gloss meter that can control the value of the gloss that is being either printed or on the original swatch to replicate.
And depending on the type of varnish that we use, we have goals or standard that we need to achieve for that gloss. So we will go and put it at the right level that we have to be, and then we will measure from that point on.
Okay, great. Another question to follow that right up on the instrument side was, do you employ spectrometers or to measure your light sources?
The light source is in the spectrophotometer.
Yeah. I don't know
for lighting.
I don't know if that question related to
I think that question was whether or not you use a spectrophotometer to evaluate viewing conditions and lighting where we're looking at print. So the answer to that would be yes. There's a couple manufacturers that have that capability, and we definitely use it to validate lighting conditions to ensure that we're not, metamerism is a huge problem in color matching, and that's where colors look different under different lighting conditions. It's already been addressed, and that's part of the process, is to validate that we do have consistent lighting conditions, or at least we're aware of what is right and what's wrong.
Yeah, and if you
we can also measure we also measure the intensity of the light in all our light booths to make sure that the bulbs are not at the end of their life, and operators will, independently from the spectrophotometer, will not look at the color wrongly because the light has faded down below 5,000 Kelvin.
Okay.
Yeah. Good.
So another question that popped in was, what are OBAs and coating, which are optical brightening agents? Same thing that's found in paper. So that was
Guy probably is good at that. That's, it's one of those things because many coatings don't have OBAs, but some do, and I'm sure, Guy, that you run into that, and you probably have some thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, you're not going to clean up a board by putting optical brightener and the varnish. If the board is yellow, you're just going to make it a bright yellow. But some board contain, yes, optical brightener, and it will not necessarily affect the color as much as it may affect your customer at their line, because you're going to calibrate ultimately to the board that you have for your color management system, and you're going to prove to your customer your specialing, especially as Francois mentioned on the light color. You will get that shade throughout the light color, and you will calibrate with your customer, and that's now going to become your zero. The question about the optical brightener very often may affect your customer down at their end, depending on the type of reader that they have on their processing line. And we've had some customers telling us not to use such a board because they were detecting the optical brightener in the board, and this would trigger the readers to on a false reading. So that's more of the issue that we've seen with that.
Okay. Yep. There was another question here. It says, can you speak about factors related to the creation and validation of color profiles?
Sure. We all can.
Yeah, the creation of color profiles, and in fact, you have to establish some very good foundations. And when I'm talking foundations, a little bit pretty much all the topics that we covered by ensuring that the plate curve, the original plate, the substrate, the ink laydown, and everything is pretty consistent. Again, to stabilize every element for the foundation is what you have to make for creating a color profile. Then you can print such a fingerprinting target, and ensuring after that, and that was one of the key things also that Ron expressed, make sure that you can maintain the status or the conditions where your profile's target was made. I think these are the two key things to keep in mind when you want to be profiling an element.
Okay, great. A couple more questions. I'm trying to read these and scroll through this tiny little box I'm looking at here, this new WebEx screen. How do you predict and control matching the appearance of color involving metallic, fluorescent, or pearlescent pigments?
Sorry, can you repeat the beginning of your question? There's been some noise.
How do you predict and control matching the appearance of color involving metallic, fluorescent, or pearlescent pigments?
The only way to kind of predict is to have some ink swatch drawdown being made on the accurate board. There's pretty much the only very accurate element where you can predict what you're going to see.
The metallic issue, the metallic question is always an issue, and Ron was here not too long ago, and we've had that discussion around a metallic gold, where not a lot of printer have the capability or the luxury to buy spherical spectrophotometer to do that. So that's always a tricky question, but nonetheless, you can still, from a non-metallic color, read some spectrophotometrical data, LEB data, in which you, once it's approved on press, you can maintain. So you will maintain a color that has been approved. As for the pearlescent and everything, we will very often do a test on press at the end of a job or something like that in order to put ourselves in a better prediction mode and not to end up in a 10-hour witch hunting on the press for the right color. So very often before we get there, we will try it. And we will maintain with the LEB value that we will get out of our color management system, and that will ensure consistency on press without using a spherical.
Yeah. Okay, and finally, to wrap up, maybe Ron, you take this last question: is how often should you verify your device condition, and does it differ for digital versus conventional?
So you mean measurement device, or you mean?
I'm assuming that's from the question. That's what the person's asking. Yes.
So I would say for printing device, all the time, all day long, every day. So maybe not practical, but if you look at some places like where Guy is, they have every measurement goes into a database and they can see where it is. But you know, on digital, maybe it's once per shift. You know, where you'd read a control strip and you'd be charting that. But pretty much if you don't measure, you don't know where you are. So you need to measure as much as you can without slowing down production, obviously, but you need to measure all the time. So if the device is a printing device, then that's pretty much you're going to be measuring all the time. So you can see where that is. And the more automated it is, the better it is, obviously. And if you're talking about a measurement device, then that can be a little bit different, but there's yearly calibrations, and then there's also trending and tracking and reading a tile set, you know, every quarter or every month or at a certain period, just to show that that device isn't changing.
And I lied. We'll take one more question here. It's a good question. Okay. Yeah. We have issues with packaging graphics where spot color. I'm sorry, I'm having to scroll here. This is hard with this new screen here. I'm sorry. We have issues with packaging graphics where spot. I can't even do this on this thing.
Maybe you need glasses, Tim.
No, it's
I can read it.
It's this.
You want me to read it?
It's a tiny little screen. Okay.
So this is, I believe it's from Bill Pope's asking the question that we have issues with packaging graphics where a spot color will overprint a process ink, typically gradations and screens. The proofing systems do not accurately simulate the printed results. We end up with two different files.
So the answer to that, which is, so that's a great question. So the way that I would answer that, and I don't want to point at certain products or anything, but the way that I look at that is the old way of proofing and the old way of working with proofing systems and preparing files didn't ever really predict that. That was always kind of the danger point with proofing. At this point right now, there's all this new spectral blending technology, and these newer systems can actually simulate spot color on spot color on process, hints of spot colors on each other, and actually do a pretty good job of doing that. The dangerous, unfortunate part of that is not that many people have those systems right now. So a lot of them are still in the blind mode. So tints of a spot color on a spot color, and especially tints of a spot color on a spot color, with newer technologies that do spectral blending, can be produced really well so that you can predict what's going to happen. But with the older technology, it's only a guess. You don't really have much luck. So that works with some technology, but not with all of them.
Okay, well, that does it for the webinar. Thank you so much for everybody who's joined the webinar today, and thank you so much for the panelists and all your time and great input. And we look forward to seeing you next month. And anybody can make the BrandQ training at Microsoft in Redmond, Washington, September 18th and 19th. It'd absolutely be worth your while to attend, and hopefully we'll see you there. You can sign up and register online at idealliance.org. And I thank you very much for your time and attention today, wherever you are in the world, and for everyone on this call and all the panelists.
Great, thanks guys, and thanks for attending. We appreciate it, and Guy and Francois and your guys, thanks for showing up, and Jeff as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Take care, guys. Bye.